I'm speaking with a PhD researcher who specifically looks at male suicide next week, and I like the nuance in a lot that you've said, because the idea of therapy is to uncover the ideas of how you feel and why you feel and how you operate, and kind of
Hmm.
to finally learn what your origin story is, because up until the time you're 8 or 16 or whatever, I don't think we really fully understand what we've went through in our life. We don't have the knowledge, we don't have the awareness. And so, but there is that stopping point where you're like, okay, I get that my parents did this, this was perpetrated by bullies at school, like all of these things happened,
Hmm.
yes. But I think, if we, to your point, if we always look at our lives like we always have a boot on our neck, it's easy to just lay down and say, well, I can't do anything. I'm a
Hmm.
victim to all of these things, even though they happened however many years ago. And I think that's the hardest part, that like putting on that backpack and being like, but this is my life now. And what I do from here on out, I can change things. I can look at things differently. I can decide to relate to my parents better, or I can decide to never speak to them again, depending what the actions happened in the past were.
Hmm.
And so, I suppose my question is, when is it? Because you're like, I'm the modern man, or not the modern man, the initiated man. When they step into that new era of manhood and responsibility to do something greater than themselves, when do they take time to actually accept that, like, maybe raising a bunch of kids that maybe one is sick, and like, when can they accept their own suffering to realize that they need some sort of healing so they can continue that journey? Because I think a lot of
Hmm.
this, at least the research on men with addiction and suffering and suicide, it doesn't seem like it's just because they're not living unfulfilling lives, which is clearly part of it, but also that men have been taught not to feel any of the things that are hurting them. So they don't know when they're in a bad situation, a bad relationship, something that's really taxing them. And so
Hmm.
their only outlet to feel anything is gambling, drugs, porn, alcohol, and then eventually, sadly,
Hmm.
suicide. So how do we get to a point to do all these things to move into that adult male agency that you're alluding to, but also men can accept what their own needs are?
Well, it is a false paradigm of our modern culture that men can't cry, and and it drives me crazy, all this polarity talk around it, your inner feminine.
Right.
And
Oh, fuck.
it's like,
It drives me nuts. Oh,
what what would you take from men and call feminine? Compassion, self-care, empathy, emotions. That's not feminine.
yeah.
And how dare you try to pull that from men?
Yes.
It's simply not true.
I love your anger behind that, because I feel the same thing, and it's good to be able to express it with someone, because there's such a sadness in me through all the
Yeah.
research I've been doing for the book. I was talking about that, like, we take this from boys at such a young age that it should make everybody angry.
Yeah. I'll tell you, little, there, oh gosh, I've studied mythology, history, indigenous cultures all around the world. There is always emotional discharge. There's always emotional either reintegration back into the tribe, and humanity and being and sensitivity and vulnerability. It's included everywhere. That when the Spartans would go to war, they would call them, they ran farms. They were dads. They were they weren't just dudes with the little speedos and the cloaks that just fought all day.
Right.
And so when they called the Spartans up to go to war, they would there's a little ritual before war where they would write their name on a stick, and then they would break the stick in half, and it was a metaphor or a ritual of death. Like, hey, we all gathered, there's our enemy, and I just died. And then I tie half the stick to my shield, and half the stick goes in the basket behind our lines. And then at that point, hoka hey, today's a good day to die. Which which means I don't have to be afraid and piss myself of what will happen to me or what I'm going to do, because it doesn't matter. I'm already dead. And so it's pretty easy to kick ass from that mindset. And that is the full claiming of the martial warrior aspect of masculinity. And it's valuable. It's why we're here on the planet, is that we had men who are willing to break the stick and go stab a bison for the tribe. We, you know, and to stand at the mouth of the cave and tell the saber-toothed cat, you're not coming in. That also a birthright of men, is to be able to armor up and do the things that other people are not willing or capable of doing. But at the end of the battle, they would put the sticks back together. And it was a way of not only tallying their losses, but it was a reintegration ritual. And at that point, the Spartans would shudder and they would wail and they would weep because they were reborn and they got to go home. They were resurrected. And so there was weeping and wailing. And there's weeping and wailing at the end of every, battle or traumatic event, which is why the knights, would take their armor off at the church, and they would be given a robe, and they would write love letters and go on pilgrimages, and the samurai would take their armor off and do calligraphy and pottery and flower arranging. So there is just battle tested reintegration rituals throughout history of men reclaiming their vulnerability, their emotions, their sensitivity, their empathy. So it is a legacy of men to do the hard things and also return home. And we're not taught any of that